Right, so let's get started. Okay, rice farmers in Cambodia and Myanmar under pressure, right? So what's the heading, right? So as I told you that for every case study, there would be a topic, a heading, right? And the heading here says that rice farmers in Cambodia and Myanmar under pressure, right? So rice farmers across Cambodia and Myanmar in Southeast Asia have been left searching for new markets for their crops after the European Union announced that it will now be imposing substantial tariffs on rice from both countries for the next 3 years, right? Now, what's the problem that these two countries are facing? So Cambodia and Myanmar are facing the pressure that European Union said that there will be tariffs from the rice, tariff imposed on the rice that's imported from these two countries, right? And obviously, then these two countries are in search of other export markets. So they would want to export their rice output to some other country, right? So Abdullah, welcome to the class. So we are doing May-June 2021 case study, and this is variant 2.2, May-June 2021, variant 2.2. So we have just started. So we just read the first line. So it says rice farmers in Cambodia and Myanmar under pressure. Rice farmers across Cambodia and Myanmar in Southeast Asia. So these are the two countries in Southeast Asia have been left searching for new markets for their crop after the European Union announced that it will now be imposing substantial tariffs on rice from both countries for the next 3 years. An investigation has confirmed that increase in rice imports from these countries has been damaging to EU rice producers. So what was the reason for imposing tariff? So reason for imposing tariff is that investigation has shown that rice imports from these countries are damaging the damaging the EU, European Union rice producers. So their local producers are threatened with the cheaper imports, most probably that cheaper imports of rice from Cambodia and Myanmar, and therefore they want to put tariff on the rice imported from these two countries. Okay. Representatives of EU farmers welcome the decision as the cheap rice imported from Southeast Asia has been contributing to EU farmers and laborers leaving agriculture and migrating to towns. Now, what was the problem European Union is facing? The problem is that their own farmers were facing huge competition from cheaper imports, as I told you, right? Cheap rice imported from Southeast Asia has been contributing to EU farmers and laborers leaving agriculture, right? So they do not make a lot of profit. Now they're not making a lot of profit because the demand for their product is low, right? And therefore they have stopped producing these products and instead they are migrating to towns and cities, right? So that's the problem. EU rice imports from Southeast Asia countries increased from 9,000 tons in 2012 to 360,000 tons in 2017. Oh my God, right? So just imagine that within 5 years, at the start of like in 2012, the total import that European Union made from these countries was only 9,000 tons. And by 2017, the import had increased to 360,000 tons, leading to a sharp rise in the price leading to a sharp fall in the price of rice in the European Union, obviously, right? So when there is so much quantity being imported, which is cheap, so the price of rice in European Union fell. In 2018, approximately 30% of all EU rice imports came from countries with duty-free status, with most being shipped in from Cambodia and Myanmar, right? The increase in low price imports has caused serious difficulties for EU rice producers. Their market share in the EU dropped substantially from 61% to 29%. So just imagine the type of damage they have done, right? So what they're saying here that why European Union is imposing tariff on rice imported from Cambodia and Myanmar, because in the 5 years duration, like from 2012 to 2017, the imports have increased from 9,000 tons to 360,000 tons, right? And these are duty-free countries, right? So they have the status of duty-free countries, which means that previously they had no tariff imposed, and now these countries will be subject to tariffs, right? Easy. And due to that, the market share of European Union farmers have decreased from 61% to 29%, right? Rice is currently grown across 8 European Union countries, including Italy, whose government initially requested that the EU investigate the issue in March 2018. to protect the EU rice industry, right? So it was the Italy who started off with the investigation because Italy is a major producer of rice, and Italy wanted the European Union to investigate that, the cheap imports of rice coming from Cambodia and Myanmar, right? Cambodia and Myanmar have enjoyed duty-free rice exports to the EU since 2010, when tariffs on the crop were removed as part of a policy which aims to promote EU trade in goods with world's 50 least developed countries. So what did European Union do? In 2010, European Union provided duty-free status to certain countries which were the 50 least developed countries in the world, including Myanmar and Cambodia, right? Other more developed countries in Southeast Asia, including Thailand and Vietnam, have long been paying tariff of around US $200 per ton for rice exports to the European Union. For both Cambodia and Myanmar, rice is a major export, and the European Union has become their most profitable market. So the new tariff has harmed their economies, right? Okay. Now, the next it says the European Union is currently Cambodia's largest destination for rice exports, accounting for 43% of all exported rice. So 43% of Cambodia's rice is going directly to European Union. It is thought that Cambodia rice industry could be put in a critical condition as the result of EU tariffs. In order to offset the additional cost resulting from tariff, local rice farmers will have to cut production costs and may need to grow different crops altogether. One suggestion is that the government subsidies could make Cambodia's rice industry more competitive, right? Now let's sum this up so far what we've discussed, right? So this is May, June 2021, Zohan. This is May, June 2021, variant 2.2, right? Now what it says that Cambodia and Myanmar were two major exporters of rice to European Union, but now they have imposed, I'm giving you a very quick overview. Now they have announced that substantial tariff will be imposed on the import of rice from these countries for the next 3 years. An investigation confirmed that the rice imports from these countries are damaging EU rice producers. And due to that, EU farmers and laborers leaving agriculture, and they're migrating to towns. That's why they did it. European Union imports from these two Southeast Asian countries increased from 9,000 tons in 2012 to 360,000 tons in 2017, leading to a sharp fall in the price of rice in the European Union. In 2018, approximately 30% of all EU rice imports came from countries with duty-free status, with most being shipped in from Cambodia and Myanmar. So 30% of all rice import in European Union was coming from countries that had duty-free status, and among those were Cambodia and Myanmar, right? The increase in low price imports has caused serious difficulties for European Union rice producers. Their market share in the EU has dropped from 61% to 29%, right? Because obviously European Union producers, farmers were growing rice more expensive, their costs were higher, and therefore consumers were preferring cheaper rice, right? And therefore their market share decreased from 61% to 29%, right? Now rice is grown currently across all 8 European Union countries, including Italy, whose government initially requested that the EU investigate the issue in March 2018 to protect the EU rice industry. So among 8 European countries that grow rice, Italy was one of them, and Italy initiated this investigation to find out that, what's the damage that cheap imports of rice are doing to their market, and therefore they came up with the decision that they will impose tariff from rice imported from Cambodia and Myanmar for the next three years. Right? Okay. Does this make sense? So this is what we then discussed. The European Union is currently Cambodia's largest destination for rice exports, accounting for 43% of all exported rice. It is thought that Cambodia's rice industry could be put in a critical condition as a result of EU tariffs. In order to offset the additional cost resulting from the tariff, local rice farmers have to cut production costs and may need to grow different crops altogether, because now they don't stand a chance of exporting rice to European Union, which was their major source of income and revenue. So now they might need to grow different crops which are not subject to tariff and so on, right? And one suggestion is that the government subsidizes. So the government gives subsidies to Cambodia farmers so that their costs are low when the cost of production would be low, and then they export to European Union eventually. they can compete, they do stand a chance to compete in the European Union with subsidies, but not without subsidies. So that's the suggestion being put forward. The impact of the tariff will ultimately depend on the extent to which European Union consumer consider rice produced in the EU to be a good substitute for Cambodian rice. Consumers in Europe may not mind paying a bit more for Cambodian rice. Now, there's another thing that they have mentioned over here, right? So European Union consumers are very much used to Cambodian rice, right? So what it says here that the impact of tariff will depend on the extent to which European Union's consumers consider rice produced in the EU to be a good substitute. So if they think that their own country's rice is also good quality, then they can continue using that. Otherwise, they might still continue buying Cambodian rice. Myanmar is in a similar situation as the EU has become one of Myanmar's major rice markets. Myanmar reached an all-time high of 269,000 tons of rice exported to EU in 2017. So Myanmar alone exported how much? 293 tons of rice to European Union in 2017. But this could change now that there is a high barrier for entry to the European Union rice market, forcing farmers to look closer to home for different buyers. Myanmar Rice Federation stated that the EU's decision to levy tariffs on the country's rice exports had serious potential negative effects on Myanmar's economy, right? So they're not obviously liking it that the European Union has imposed tariff on their product, which means that now their exports will significantly be reduced, and therefore that would affect local Myanmar and Cambodian farmers, right? Okay, and then it also says source Robin Spiles Southeast Asia Globe 18 January 2019. Okay, now next we have some table here. Table 1.1 says Myanmar and Cambodia consumer prices with annual percentage change. So how much was the rate of inflation? That's what it's showing us. Myanmar 6.8, 4%, 7.1, 6.8, 7.5, and the start 2019 and 2020 has a start, and that means projections. I mean, it's not an actual thing, right? Because this article was published in 2019, start of 2019, 18th January, right? So for 2019 and 2020, obviously these are not actual inflation targets. These are just the projections, right? Expectation. Then table 1.2 shows Myanmar and Cambodia's current account balances, percentage of national income, right? So Myanmar had current account balances, they had a deficit. Myanmar had a deficit throughout 2016, 2017, 2018, and even in 2019 and 2020, they're expecting a current account deficit. Same goes for Cambodia. So again, it's a deficit, right? Easy. Okay. Now this was the case study, right, students? Now let's get started here. And let's see what happens over here. Compare the change in the price level in Myanmar with that in Cambodia's between 2016 and 2018. Compare the change in price level in Myanmar and that in Cambodia between 2016 and 2018. 2016 and 2018. How many marks it is for? It is for 2 marks. 2016 and 2018, right? So what happened? Where was the rate of inflation higher? Where was the rate of inflation higher, students? Right. So it says compare the change in the price level in Myanmar and with that in Cambodia between 2016 and 2018. Okay. Now, one simple way of doing this, students, did everyone get the chance to read the question? Right. So one simple way of doing this is that you assume a starting price. What do? You assume a starting price. I'll show you how, right? So have a look at this. Let me first write it down. May, June, this is 2021, and the variant is 22, right? Now, students, have a look at this. What you can do, you can assume each ton of rice, since we are talking about rice, let's say, was $100, at the start of 2016. So what am I assuming? I'm assuming that in both the countries at the start of 2016, because we have to compare the change in prices between 2016 and 2018. So we are assuming that at the start of 2016, both countries had each ton of rice for $100 each, right? Then you will do what? Then you will first year increase the price by 6.8% for Myanmar, Then next year you'll increase by 4%, and then you'll increase by 7.1%. Now, can any one of you tell me that what will be the final value? Can any one of you tell me quickly if you can calculate the value, right? So what would be the value of 1 ton of rice, which had a starting value of $100 per ton at the end of 2016? Can anyone of you do that? Just give me a second. Let me also get my laptop or calculator. Okay, are you doing the calculations? Right. So first year it would be $106.8, right? In the paragraph. Okay. Price, you were saying, did they mention the price? No, I don't think so. They mentioned the price. It's the price of the tariff that was imposed per ton, right? It's the price of the tariff that's imposed per ton. They did not mention how much is the price of rice in each of these countries. They did not. They did not. No. No. Right? So, I mean, yeah, no problem, right? So think about the students quickly do the calculation, right? So after the first year for my number, it would be 106.8. Then you have to increase it by 4%, right? Yes or no? Then you have to increase the next thing by 107.1 divided by 100, right? So the closing price for my number is 118.96. 118. Right? So it would be $118.96, right? Easy. And then similarly, we do it for Cambodia, and that would be a little lower, as we can tell by the rate of, rate of inflation, right? So that is lower, 2.9 divided by 100, right? And then 2.5 divided by 100. So that would give you 118.64. 108.64. Cambodia turns out to be dollars. Students, are you getting what I'm doing here? 108 point. I mean, I assume that we were not expected to calculate these values, right? But I mean, just for the sake of, more clarity, right? Just to show that the ending price for Myanmar would be higher given the fact that, the rate of inflation is higher in the 3 years. In fact, in each year, you can, I could have done that in a much easier way. You could have told that the question was saying, compare the change in price level in Myanmar with that in Cambodia between 2016 and 2018. You would have said that the prices for Myanmar was increasing at a faster rate. In fact, every year, the rate of inflation in Myanmar was higher than that of Cambodia. So therefore, the closing price at the end of 2018 for Myanmar for each ton of rice or whatever it might be would be much higher compared to the price of the same product in Cambodia. Did you guys get this? Right, students? Did you get this? So we'll quickly look at the marking scheme as well, right? What does the marking scheme says here? Right, okay, right. So both price levels rose. Yeah, so one part was telling that both price levels were rising because of inflation. The price level rose more in Myanmar, less in Cambodia. The rate of increase was increasing in Myanmar and declining in Cambodia, right? The rate of increase was increasing in Myanmar and declining in Cambodia. Yeah, another thing that we kind of ignored, right? So in this case, 6.8. No, but Myanmar, it's also fell in the second year. But overall, it's an upward increase, 6.8, then 4.0, and then 7.1. And in this case, it's constantly declining. The rate of increase is declining, not the prices. Prices are still increasing. Students, are you getting me or not? So this is a very tricky thing. So always remember that there's a difference between rate of increase in prices and prices themselves. So even if the rate of increase is 0.1%, that means the prices will increase. But if the rate is low, that means that the increase in price would be low. Yes or no? So if there's a 5% increase in prices in Pakistan and 10% increase in prices in Bangladesh, then that means that prices for both the countries would rise. But in which country would it rise less? In Pakistan, it would rise less because we have a rate of inflation lower than that of the other country. Easy. So what you were supposed to say that in both countries, right, the inflation is taking place, so prices will be higher in 2018 compared to 2016, but the rate of rise in Cambodia would be less because each year the rate of inflation is lower in Cambodia compared to Myanmar? Any confusion so far? Any confusion, students? Anything that's not clear? Is making sense? We good? Right. So if everything is clear, we'll move to the next question. Right? Okay. Now the next question here says compare the current account balance of Myanmar with that of Cambodia in 2018. Right? So we are expected to do something similar to what we did in the A part, right? Compare the current account balance of Myanmar with that of Cambodia, right? Now think about this. Did they mention the time period? In 2018, compare the current account balance of Myanmar with that of Cambodia in 2018. So in 2018, Myanmar had a deficit of 2% percentage of national income. So this is the percentage of GDP, right? And Cambodia again is the percentage of the GDP, right? So what will you say? You'll say that Myanmar had a deficit on its current account of 2% as a percentage of its GDP. Now, simply speaking, if Myanmar GDP was $100 billion in 2018, out of $100 billion in 2018, $2 billion was the deficit on its current account balance. Yes or no? So the first statement should be that both countries had a deficit in 2018, but Cambodia had a bigger percentage deficit, had a bigger percentage of its national income as the deficit on its current account, right? So the first statement would be that both countries had a deficit on their current account in 2018, but Cambodia's deficit as a percentage of its national income or GDP was bigger compared to Myanmar. Yes or no? Is it making sense or not? Students, right? Both in deficits, 1 mark for mentioning that both are in deficit. The deficit is greater, more significant percentage of national income in Cambodia than in Myanmar. Simple. Easy. Students, is making sense, right? So for these calculation questions, you have to be very careful how many marks there are and what exactly you are supposed to write in it, right? Any confusion so far, students? Anything that's not clear? Cambodia is projected to decrease while Myanmar one is projected to increase. Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Is projected to decrease. Cambodia, Myanmar is projected to increase. Very good. Good observation. Excellent, Abdullah. That's correct. But since it was only asking for 2018, so we were not supposed to give a comparison. Are you getting me? Now, your observation is absolutely on point, and that's correct. But since it was asking for one particular year, it wasn't asking you for a duration, right? So you have to be a little careful as to what it's saying and so on. But yeah, that's correct. Good observation. Are we good, students? Can we move on? Okay. Now explain 2 policies that could improve the competitiveness of the rice from Myanmar and Cambodia in the EU market. 2 policies that could improve the competitiveness, right? That will improve the competitiveness rice from Myanmar and Cambodia in the European Union market. What can they do? 2 policies. What can they do? Yeah. Right. So one is already mentioned in the passage. One is already mentioned in the passage. You have to, either you can use that as well, or you can come up with your own 2 policies. What do you think? Right. So which one is mentioned in the passage? Students, think about this. One suggestion is that government subsidies could make Cambodia's rice industry more competitive, right? Now, what would subsidies do? Right. So think about this. So subsidies would reduce the cost of rice production, which would mean that both countries would now be exporting rice at a lower price to EU than before, and therefore, even after tariff, the prices might not rise. Are you getting me or not? As much as they would have without subsidies. How many of you got this point? Students, did you get this point or not, right? So the question was saying that 2 policies could improve the competitiveness of rice from Myanmar and Cambodia in the EU market. Explain any 2 policies. Now you have to explain how that will work, right? So the first policy that we have mentioned here is subsidies. Now what are subsidies? Subsidies, do know are financial payments. You can also mention this in your answer. Subsidies are financial payments by the government to producers. When subsidies are provided, so that's kind of government contributing towards your cost of production. So when government contributes towards your cost of production overall decreases, and then with the same profit margin, farmers can, export their rice or product at a lower price to the EU. And with the same tariff that the EU has imposed on rice from Myanmar and Cambodia, the overall price will not rise as much as it would have risen without tariff. Yes or no? So that's how I've explained this. Right. And the second one is very good. So the second one is subsidies you will not write, Zohan, but you can talk about other supply side policies. You'll write it down like this: supply side policies, right, which we were talking about yesterday as well. Government can provide, interest-free loans for farmers to buy farming agriculture equipment. Yes or no? Capital goods / equipment, right? And what will that do? Students, you also have to explain this, right? So think about this. When government is giving interest-free loans, right, to farmers to buy equipment and machinery for their activities, then that would mean that now more output can be produced at lower cost. Because the problem with the farmers or the labor is that human error. I mean, they might not always be as much productive. They make, they might be causing raw material wastage and things like that, right? But with machinery in place, I mean, all these challenges are taken care of, right? So if government is giving them interest-free loans, then there is more affordability for these machinery and things like that. Then more farmers will be able to buy this equipment, and with that equipment being more productive, you can produce output at a lower cost, cheaper loans or interest-free loans or something like that, right? Similarly, the government can also do, you could have also written about the training of the farmers, right? Because farmers oftentimes, right, do not know what fertilizers to use, right? When to grow their crop, when to, irrigate their crop, right? Even as it happens in Pakistan as well, when to irrigate their crops, right? So with this type of, technical support from the government, because they have agricultural research departments in Pakistan as well. We have Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, I guess, PARC, Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, right? So they're already doing research that what's the best time to irrigate the crops for different crops, things like that. So when that happens, now obviously farmers will be able to produce more output more productively, right? Yes or no? Right. So let's see what the marking scheme has to say about that, right? So the marking scheme says, right, for the identification of valid policy and the explanation of how the policy could improve the competitiveness of rice, government subsidies to rice producers should lower the prices of rice and therefore make rice price more competitive. Government incentives for rice producers carry out R&D may improve the quality of rice and its competitiveness, right? So that could have been another point, right? More R&D or more productivity, more training of farmers and things like that, right? Easy, right? Right, but it also says that you could have mentioned export subsidies, we have already done, and devaluation of currencies to reduce export prices, right? Is it making sense? Right? Easy, is this correct? Okay, so students, let's move on. Right, okay. Now the next question here we have, students, after this one is, okay, discuss two factors that will determine the extent of the impact of European Union tariff, the impact the European Union tariff will have on the economies of Myanmar and Cambodia. Two factors that will determine the extent, right? Now, always be very careful with the wording that's been used in the question, because that will tell you exactly what the examiner is asking for. Discuss two factors that will determine the extent of the impact the European Union tariffs will have on the economies of Myanmar and Cambodia, right? So one factor was already mentioned over there, Do you remember? So one factor was already mentioned in the passage, and that was, right? Right. Right. This is the one. The impact of tariff will ultimately depend on the extent to which European unions consider rice produced in the EU to be a good substitute for Cambodian rice. Consumers in Europe may not mind paying a bit more for Cambodian rice, right? You do know that sometimes there are products that have some tariffs imposed, but people still buy those products because they consider those to be better quality, right? Elasticity of demand and supply, right? That's a valid point, right? So how much inelastic is the demand for Cambodian rice, Cambodian and Myanmar rice, or right? So what determines the elasticity? Can anyone of you tell me? Right? So the elasticity, right, is determined by the quality, taste, right? How much is the shelf life? Shelf life of, you know what shelf life of the product is? Right? How long does it last? Etc. Right? So if it's inelastic, then what will happen? Consumers in Europe will continue to buy Cambodian rice no matter what. Even if it's a little expensive, they will continue to buy that. Is it making sense or not? Right? So that's the first thing. Have quality factors. I mean, yeah, why not? I mean, haven't you ever heard that, fruits, like the taste of, banana, let's say, simply speaking, could be grown in India, could be very different from the taste of bananas grown in Pakistan, right? I mean, it depends on a couple of factors because of, the fertilizers that are being used, the type of land that you have, the type of agricultural conditions, weather conditions that are prevalent in a country, right? So all these factors do affect the quality, right? I mean, you must have heard about now, even in Pakistan, that this is basmati rice, or this is this type of rice, or this is this type of mango. Even there are varieties within one type of fruits, right? This type of apples are grown in Chitral, so they are better quality because they look like this or they taste like this. And these type of apples or oranges are grown in this part of Pakistan, so they are not that good quality and so on, right? So they definitely have a effect. And then obviously, depending upon the fertilizers you are using, the agricultural techniques you are using, the type of land that you have available, all these things do make a huge impact, right? Easy. So elasticity of demand for Cambodian and Myanmar rice. So you have to also explain it, right? You have to explain it. And since this is for 6 marks, you have to determine and say that if it's inelastic, so people will continue buying it more. So it doesn't make any difference, much difference. The demand will fall, but it will not fall very significantly if it's inelastic, right? But obviously, if it's more elastic, then people will quickly switch to European Union rice and so on, right? Easy. Any confusion so far? Tariffs say reduce the product, reduce the amount of producer exporting rice, cause of high tariff price on them, which is $200. Abdullah, I did not get your comment here. Tariff reduce the amount of producer exporting rice, cause of high tariff price on them, which is $200. Can you explain this to me, Abdullah? Obviously, the demand will fall, but if it's inelastic demand, the demand will not fall significantly. That's what we are, saying here. So the demand for Cambodian and Myanmar rice will fall, but it will not fall significantly if it's inelastic demand. Why? Because people value the quality, or you will talk about all these things, the taste of it, or the shelf life of rice and so on, right? So that's the first thing, right? What other factor do you think would be important? In fact, it's also mentioned in the passage, right? So another factor that will determine the impact of this thing on these two economies would be, right, new markets, right? Have been left searching for new markets for their crop after the European Union announced, right? So think about this, whether they are able to make up for the fall in their demand by exporting this rice to some other countries or not. That's a big, big thing that will determine the extent of impact. I repeat myself, right? So the extent of impact that these two countries would face due to European Union imposing tariff against their rice is dependent on whether these two countries are able to establish their markets in other countries, right? And get to export these products to other countries or not. Yes or no? Is making sense? Now, inelastic, the demand will fall, but it will be less compared to the price. Eventually, the revenue will increase, export revenue. Yes, absolutely. That's correct. That's correct. Right? Students, did you get this? Another factor would be how quickly Cambodia and Myanmar get to discover alternative export destinations for their rice, right? Now think about this. How quickly and how big, right? Big is also a thing here. Why? Because think about this. They were exporting huge amounts of rice to these countries, right? So they were total exporting somewhere 360,000 tons in 2017, right? So 360,000 tons is no joke, right? Now, whether they are able to, and European Union is not one country, you know this, right? It's a collection of countries. I don't know exactly how many countries are part of the European Union, but good 20, 25 countries are part of it, right? So coming back to the point, the idea is that it would depend on whether these countries can find alternate markets to export their rice and how quickly they are able to do that, right? And then you have to explain these 2 points, that if they're able to quickly discover, so let's say if European Union is not buying from them, they can switch to Australia, USA, other big countries like China, India, right? So then they can kind of overcome that, or Asia, Africa, right? So then they can kind of make up for that loss. But if not, right, then it would be a problem. Students, are you getting me? Right? Okay. Now, what's the question says? For each relevant factor, identified one mark, explain one mark, and develop to show the impact on the economies of Myanmar and Cambodia. The price elasticity of rice from Myanmar and Cambodia and the EU. If the demand is inelastic, this means that the rise in price will lead to a less than proportional fall in demand. Exactly, right? Therefore, the exports of Myanmar and Cambodia may not significantly reduce. Then what are the other factors? General factors are required that apply to both countries. These include the price elastic demand for the rice from these countries, the cross elasticity of demand between rice from Myanmar and Cambodia and the rice from the EU, the extent to which they can find other markets, right? This is what I was talking about, right? How the government of these countries respond by providing subsidies, devaluing the currencies, the impact on the economy, maybe on the balance of payments, employment, growth, and needs to be clear, right? Okay, so one thing that we kind of missed here. Okay, students, if the class is ending, quickly rejoin. Quickly rejoin with the same link, and then we'll complete off with this case study today. Rejoin.